I discovered my wife was stealing my inheritance money to run away with her lover. She thought I was clueless, but I had a plan that would destroy both their lives. Watch until the end to see how sweet revenge tastes. Subscribe to the channel and write where you're watching from in the comments. The first time I saw the text message, I convinced myself it was meant for someone else. Can't wait to feel you inside me again. He'll be gone all weekend. My phone had accidentally synced with Victoria's when I was helping her set up her new iPad last month. Since then, random notifications from her device would occasionally pop up on mine. A technical glitch I planned to fix but never got around to. A glitch that now revealed what 5 years of marriage had concealed. Victoria was the woman who cried at our wedding vows. The woman who bought me personalized cufflinks for Christmas. The woman who still left little love notes in my briefcase. And apparently the woman who couldn't wait to feel another man inside her while I was away on business. I stared at the notification, my coffee growing cold on the kitchen counter. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock my father had given us as a wedding present. Victoria was still asleep upstairs, probably dreaming of whoever Jake was. That's who the message was addressed to. I should have confronted her immediately. That's what they tell you to do in those relationship advice columns. Communication is key. Honesty is the foundation of trust. All those platitudes that sound so reasonable until you're standing in your kitchen at 6 a.m. discovering your entire marriage might be a lie. Instead, I took a screenshot, then deleted the notification. I finished my coffee, packed my overnight bag, and kissed my sleeping wife goodbye. She stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible before drifting back to sleep. "I'll be back Sunday night," I whispered, knowing full well I had no intention of staying away that long. As I pulled out of our driveway, I glanced back at our 4-bedroom colonial. The house Victoria had insisted was perfect for starting a family. A family she kept delaying because the timing wasn't right. Now I wondered if there was a different reason altogether. My name is Michael Harrington. I'm 34 years old, and until that morning, I thought I had everything figured out. Good job as a financial consultant. Beautiful wife. Solid investments. The perfect suburban life. What I didn't know then was that Victoria had married me for my money. And what she didn't know was that I was about to discover just how deep her deception went. Our courtship had been a whirlwind. We met at a charity gala 4 years earlier. I was there representing my firm, which had donated generously to the Children's Hospital. Victoria was volunteering, helping coordinate the silent auction. She wore a midnight blue dress that made her eyes look like sapphires, and when she smiled at me from across the room, I felt something I hadn't experienced since high school: genuine butterflies. "You keep staring," my colleague James had teased. "Either go talk to her or stop being creepy." So I went over, introduced myself, and somehow managed not to sound like a complete idiot. Victoria was charming, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in my painfully boring explanations of financial risk assessment. By the end of the night, I had her number. 3 months later, we were living together. A year after that, I proposed on a beach in Maui at sunset because I thought that's what women wanted. Victoria cried and said it was perfect. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. Instead of driving to the airport for my supposed business trip to Chicago, I checked into a hotel 20 minutes from our house. I needed time to think, to plan. The rational part of my brain suggested there might be an explanation. Perhaps I'd misunderstood. Perhaps Jake was a character in a book she was reading, and she was messaging her book club friend. Even as I thought it, I knew I was grasping at straws. I opened my laptop and logged into our shared accounts. Victoria and I maintained separate personal accounts, but we had joint checking and savings for household expenses and vacations. I scrolled through recent transactions, noting nothing unusual. Then I checked our phone records. There it was. A number that appeared repeatedly, often late at night or during my regular weekly squash game. A quick search revealed it belonged to a Jacob Mercer. Another search showed he was a partner at Carson and Whitley, the law firm where Victoria worked as a paralegal. I leaned back in the hotel chair, feeling strangely calm, almost detached, like I was investigating someone else's life falling apart. My training as a financial consultant kicked in, methodical and thorough. I began documenting everything, creating a timeline of suspicious calls and texts. Then I remembered something else. Victoria had been unusually interested in my recent inheritance. When my uncle passed away 6 months ago, leaving me a substantial sum, she'd suggested we should keep it separate from our other investments for tax purposes. She'd even recommended setting up a new account. At the time, I thought she was being financially prudent. Sick curiosity drove me to log into that separate account now. What I saw made my blood run cold. Small withdrawals. $500 every week for the past 6 months, nearly $15,000 gone, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Victoria wasn't just cheating, she was stealing from me. I sat in that hotel room for hours, piecing together the extent of her betrayal. By midnight, fueled by room service whiskey and cold rage, I had a plan. Victoria thought she was clever, but she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. I called James, the only person I trusted completely. "I need your help," I said when he answered, groggy from sleep, "and I need you not to ask too many questions." James and I had been friends since college. He knew me well enough to hear the steel in my voice. "What do you need?" he asked simply. "Information on a Jacob Mercer and access to your lake house for a few days." "Consider it done," he said without hesitation. "And Mike, whatever's happening, I've got your back." I hung up, feeling the first real human emotion since seeing that text message. Gratitude. It would be the last positive feeling I'd experience for quite some time. Over the next 48 hours, I executed my plan with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made me successful in my career. First, I hired a private investigator recommended by James to document Victoria's activities while I was supposedly away. Then, I contacted my lawyer to understand my options regarding the stolen inheritance money. Given that it was kept in a separate account and was clearly designated as inheritance, she has no legal claim to it, my lawyer explained. The unauthorized transfers constitute theft. You could pursue criminal charges. Criminal charges. The words hung in the air between us. Could I really send my wife to jail, the woman I'd planned to have children with? "Let's hold that option in reserve," I said finally. "What about divorce?" He walked me through the process, explaining that with evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct, I could potentially avoid alimony payments despite our prenuptial agreement having an infidelity clause that worked in both directions. "Document everything," he advised, "and do not confront her until we have all our ducks in a row." So I didn't. On Sunday evening, I returned home as if from my Chicago trip, carrying a small gift bag containing a bracelet I'd purchased at an overpriced boutique in the hotel lobby. Victoria greeted me at the door, wearing the cashmere sweater I'd given her for her birthday. Her blonde hair was freshly washed, and she smelled like the expensive perfume she saved for special occasions. "I missed you," she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. I hugged her back, wondering if she'd showered away another man's touch before I arrived. "I missed you too," I lied, presenting the gift bag. "I saw this and thought of you," she exclaimed over the bracelet, slipping it on immediately and modeling it with an extended wrist. "It's beautiful, Mike, you shouldn't have." "You deserve beautiful things," I said, and in that moment, I almost convinced myself everything was normal. Almost. Over dinner, she asked about my trip, and I fabricated meetings and client lunches with the same dedication she'd apparently been bringing to our marriage. She nodded and asked all the right questions, seeming genuinely interested. Oscar-worthy performance. "How was your weekend?" I asked casually, twirling pasta onto my fork. "Quiet," she said, reaching for her wine glass, caught up on some work. "Had lunch with Megan on Saturday." Lie. According to the PI's preliminary report, which I'd received via email that afternoon, Victoria had spent Saturday night at an apartment in the city. Jacob Mercer's apartment. She hadn't returned home until 11 a.m. Sunday. "Sounds nice," I said, raising my own glass in a silent toast to her performance. "Peaceful." She smiled, relief flickering briefly across her features. "It was, but I'm glad you're home." That night when she initiated sex, I didn't refuse. I let her climb on top of me, watched her close her eyes and bite her lip the way she always did. I wondered if she made the same expressions with him, used the same moves, called out the same way. Afterward, as she curled against me and fell asleep, I lay awake planning my next steps. The PI would continue surveillance for another week, building a comprehensive file. My lawyer was already drafting divorce papers, and I had arranged for a forensic accountant to trace exactly where my inheritance money had gone. Victoria had no idea what was coming. She thought she was the player, but she'd soon discover she was being played. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in acting. I maintained our routine, leaving for work at the same time, calling during lunch breaks, bringing home her favorite takeout on Thursdays. If Victoria noticed anything amiss, she didn't show it. Perhaps she was too preoccupied with her own deception to notice mine. The PI's reports kept coming, each more damning than the last. Victoria and Jacob met 3 times, always during hours when I was reliably away. The photos were explicit enough that I stopped looking at them after the first few. The written descriptions were sufficient. The forensic accountant traced the transferred funds to a new account Victoria had opened 6 months earlier at a different bank. Nearly $15,000 of my inheritance siphoned away systematically. She'd also been setting aside portions of her own salary, accumulating a nest egg of over $40,000. She's planning an exit strategy, the accountant explained. These aren't impulsive withdrawals. They're calculated. So not only was my wife cheating and stealing, but she was also planning to leave me, the complete trifecta of betrayal. I received final confirmation when the PI managed to clone Victoria's phone during her lunch break. The text messages between her and Jacob went back 8 months. They'd met at a law firm happy hour, started flirting, escalated to hotel meetups. But it was an email chain from 3 months ago that finally shattered any lingering doubts about Victoria's character. "Jake, I need another year at most," she'd written. "His uncle left him more than we expected. Once I've moved enough of it, we can start over somewhere warm. Just keep your wife thinking everything's normal." Jacob was married too, of course he was. His reply was equally calculating, don't rush it. Too many transfers will raise flags. Slow and steady wins this race, and don't worry about Melissa, she's clueless. Too busy with her nonprofit work to notice anything. I wondered if Melissa was sitting in her own hotel room somewhere, staring at similar messages, making similar plans. With all the evidence gathered, my lawyer advised me it was time to act. We filed the divorce papers and froze the joint accounts. I transferred my remaining inheritance money to a new secure account. Then I moved most of our shared assets to protected accounts that Victoria couldn't access, leaving only the minimum required by law in our joint holdings. It wasn't technically illegal since marriage laws in our state considered me the primary breadwinner entitled to financial decision-making power. The final touch was contacting Carson and Whitley's managing partner, an old client of mine, to inform him that one of his partners was engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, creating potential liability issues for the firm. I didn't name names yet, simply advised him to investigate before a scandal erupted. Everything was in place. The trap was set. Now I just needed Victoria to walk into it. "We should take a vacation," I suggested over breakfast exactly 1 month after discovering the first text message. "Maybe the Caribbean? We haven't had a real getaway since Belize last year." Victoria looked up from her phone, momentarily startled before composing her features into enthusiastic agreement. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "When were you thinking?" "Next week. I can clear my schedule and you have vacation days saved up, right?" She hesitated almost imperceptibly. "Next week might be tight with the Peterson case wrapping up." "The week after then," I pressed, watching her calculate behind those sapphire eyes. "We deserve some time away, just the 2 of us." She smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You're right. Let me see what I can arrange. The Peterson case should definitely be finished by then." I returned her smile, noting how easily the lies fell from her lips now. She had no intention of going anywhere with me. According to her messages with Jacob, they'd been planning their own getaway for the exact time frame I'd suggested. "Perfect," I said, standing to kiss her forehead before grabbing my briefcase. "Book whatever looks good. Money's no object." As I walked out the door, I heard her already on the phone, presumably calling Jacob to adjust their plans. What she didn't know was that their planning was about to be permanently disrupted. I drove to work as usual but stopped at the post office first. The envelope I'd prepared the night before contained printed copies of Victoria's text exchanges with Jacob, bank statements showing the systematic theft of my inheritance, and a USB drive with even more evidence. I'd addressed it to Melissa Mercer with a simple note. "I thought you should know. Was it cruel? Perhaps, But Melissa deserved the truth as much as I had, and it was a key component of what was about to unfold. At the office, I cleared my schedule as promised, but not for a vacation. I'd need the time to deal with the fallout from my marriage imploding. My boss had been understanding when I'd explained the situation, offering me as much leave as necessary. "These things happen, Mike," he'd said awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with emotional conversations. "Take whatever time you need." By noon, everything was in motion. The divorce papers were being delivered to Victoria at work. The managing partner at Carson and Whitley was receiving a more detailed report about Jacob and Victoria's relationship, including documentation of when they'd used company time for their affair. And Melissa Mercer would be getting her special delivery within 24 hours. I turned off my phone and drove to James's lake house, where I planned to stay during the initial chaos. It was peaceful there, isolated enough that Victoria wouldn't find me easily. James had stocked the fridge with beer and left a bottle of expensive scotch on the counter with a note, "Drink until it hurts less. Call if you need anything." I poured myself a generous glass of scotch and sat on the deck overlooking the water. The autumn air was crisp, leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson around the edges of the lake. I thought about the future I'd planned with Victoria. The children we might have had. The growing old together, all of it built on quicksand. My phone remained off. I knew what would happen next. Victoria would be served the papers at work, creating the first public crack in her carefully constructed image. She'd try to call me, first angry, then panicked when she couldn't reach me. She'd rush home to find I wasn't there and that her access to our accounts had been severely limited. She'd call Jacob, but he'd be dealing with his own implosion as the managing partner called him into an urgent meeting. By tomorrow morning, when Melissa received her package, the final piece would fall. Jacob would be fighting for his marriage and his job. He'd have no time or inclination to continue plotting with Victoria. The chess pieces were moving exactly as I'd anticipated. I just hadn't expected to feel so hollow watching them fall. 3 days later, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen immediately lit up with notifications: 67 missed calls, 42 voicemails, 93 text messages. Most were from Victoria, evolving exactly as I'd predicted: initial confusion, then anger, then desperate pleading. The most recent simply said, "Please, Mike, we need to talk, I can explain everything." I doubted that very much. There were also messages from mutual friends, clearly having heard something was wrong but unsure of details. A few were from my parents, who'd apparently been contacted by Victoria when she couldn't reach me. I'd have to call them soon to explain. And there was one from a number I didn't recognize. I played the voicemail with mild curiosity. "Mr. Harrington, this is Melissa Mercer." Her voice was steady but tight with controlled emotion. "I received your package. I would like to speak with you personally if possible. This is my private number. Please call when you can." That was unexpected. I'd anticipated anger, perhaps even blame directed at me as the messenger, but her tone suggested something else. Dignity, perhaps, or a shared sense of betrayal. I decided to call her back. If nothing else, we were the only two people who truly understood what the other was experiencing. Melissa answered on the second ring. "Hello, Mrs. Mercer, it's Michael Harrington returning your call." There was a brief pause. "Thank you for calling back. And please call me Melissa." "Melissa then, I go by Mike." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her measuring her words carefully. "Mike, I wanted to thank you for sending that information. It couldn't have been easy." I leaned back against the kitchen counter, surprised by her reaction. "No, it wasn't. I'm sorry you had to find out that way." "I've suspected something for months," she said quietly. "Jacob's been distant, working late, the usual cliches, but I had no proof and he made me feel like I was being paranoid." I understood that feeling all too well. Gaslighting is standard procedure, apparently. She made a sound that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. "Yes, well, thanks to you, I'm not crazy after all, just married to a cheating bastard." Now it was my turn to laugh, brief and without humor. "We should start a club." "I'd rather start divorce proceedings," she replied, a new edge in her voice. "Which is actually why I called. My attorney suggested it might strengthen both our cases if we coordinated our approach. Present a united front, so to speak." I hadn't considered that angle. It made strategic sense. "I'd be open to that." "Good. Could we meet somewhere to discuss it? Neutral territory." We arranged to meet the following day at a coffee shop halfway between the city and the lake house. As I hung up, I felt the first stirring of something beyond anger and betrayal. A sense of purpose, perhaps. Or the satisfaction of knowing that the consequences I'd set in motion were reaching their intended targets. That night, I listened to Victoria's voicemails. Her voice evolved from indignant to tearful to desperate as the messages progressed. "How dare you freeze our accounts? Call me immediately." "Michael, please, you've misunderstood everything. Let me explain." "Baby, I'm so sorry. Whatever you think happened, we can work through this. Please come home." The final message, left just hours earlier, was different. Her voice was flat, defeated. "They fired me today. Jacob won't take my calls. His wife knows everything." "I assume that was your doing too. I never thought you could be so cruel. I guess I didn't know you at all." The irony of her last statement wasn't lost on me. I deleted all the messages and blocked her number. Whatever she had to say, I wasn't interested in hearing it. The woman I'd married, the woman I thought I knew, had never existed. Melissa Mercer looked nothing like I'd imagined. Based on Jacob's texts describing his wife as boring and basic, I'd pictured someone mousy and plain. Instead, the woman who walked into the coffee shop was striking, with dark hair cut in a precise bob and amber eyes that assessed me frankly as she approached my table. "Mike?" she asked, extending her hand. "Melissa Mercer." Her handshake was firm, businesslike. She wore no wedding ring. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, standing briefly as she took the seat across from me. "Thank you for enlightening me," she replied, setting her bag on an empty chair. "You saved me from wasting any more years with Jacob." There was a directness to her that I appreciated. No unnecessary social niceties or awkward attempts to minimize the situation. We ordered coffee and got straight to business. Melissa had already retained one of the city's top divorce attorneys and had secured a temporary restraining order against Jacob after he'd shown up at their house drunk and belligerent the night she confronted him with the evidence. "He tried to convince me the texts were taken out of context," she said, stirring cream into her coffee with precise movements. When that didn't work, he claimed Victoria had pursued him relentlessly, that he'd tried to end it multiple times. "And when that didn't work," I asked. A cold smile touched her lips. "He switched to threats, said he'd make sure I got nothing in the divorce." "That's when I called the police." I nodded, impressed by her composure. "My wife has been alternating between begging for forgiveness and accusing me of overreacting." "Classic Darvo," Melissa said. At my questioning look, she explained, "Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. It's a common manipulation tactic. I'm a psychologist," she added, as if that explained her knowledge. "Ah," I said, "that must give you some interesting perspective on all this." She shrugged slightly. "It helps me analyze the situation clinically, doesn't make it hurt any less." We spent the next hour comparing notes and strategies. Melissa's attorney had suggested we file our cases in the same court if possible, potentially even requesting the same judge. The coordinated evidence would strengthen both our positions, particularly regarding the financial misconduct. "Jacob withdrew nearly $20,000 from our savings over the past year," Melissa revealed. "I suspect some of it went toward their planned escape. The rest probably paid for hotel rooms and expensive gifts for your wife." I shared what I'd learned about Victoria's systematic theft of my inheritance. They were planning to run away together, start over somewhere warm, according to their messages. Melissa's expression hardened. "Well, they can still do that if they want. They'll just be doing it without our money." By the time we finished our coffee, we had a coordinated strategy. Melissa would share all her evidence with my attorney, and vice versa. We'd file in the same jurisdiction and request concurrent hearings if possible. And most importantly, we'd maintain a united front, refusing any attempts at reconciliation or negotiation outside the legal process. As we prepared to leave, Melissa hesitated, then asked, "How are you really doing with all this?" Beyond the legal strategy and revenge planning. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the practical aspects of dismantling my marriage that I'd barely acknowledged the emotional impact. "I'm angry," I admitted, "and hurt. But mostly I feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. There were signs I missed or ignored." She nodded in understanding. "I keep replaying every suspicious moment from the past year, wondering how I could have been so blind, but we're not the ones who should feel stupid, Mike. We trusted people who promised to be faithful. That doesn't make us fools, it makes them unworthy of the trust we gave them." Her words resonated, offering a perspective I hadn't considered. "Thank you for that." she smiled, a genuine expression that reached her amber eyes. That's what the club is for, right? Cheated on partners anonymous. First rule of COPA, it's not your fault your spouse is an asshole. I laughed, surprising myself. It felt foreign after weeks of anger and strategic planning. I'll drink to that, though perhaps not coffee. Rain, check on that drink, she suggested, gathering her things. We have divorce proceedings to focus on first. As we walked to the parking lot, I found myself curious about this woman who'd responded to betrayal with such clear-eyed determination. If you don't mind me asking, I said as we reached her car, what made you suspect Jacob in the first place? Melissa leaned against her car door, considering the question. Little things at first, new clothes, password changes on his phone, working late more often. Then bigger things, like missing money and weekend conferences that didn't match his firm's actual event calendar. She shrugged. By the time I received your package, I wasn't surprised by the affair, just by who it was with. I nodded, understanding completely. For what it's worth, I had no idea until a month ago. It blindsided me completely. Some people are very good at compartmentalizing, she said, her professional tone returning briefly. Jacob and Victoria clearly excelled at it. She opened her car door, then paused. We're going to be okay, you know, eventually. I wasn't sure if she was reassuring me or herself, but I appreciated the sentiment. I believe that too. As I watched her drive away, I realized it was the first conversation I'd had in weeks that felt honest. No manipulation, no hidden agendas. Just two people navigating the wreckage of broken trust. I returned to the lake house feeling strangely lighter. The divorce proceedings moved forward with mechanical precision. Victoria attempted to contest the division of assets, claiming she deserved half of everything despite the evidence of her financial misconduct. Her attorney, a sharp-suited woman with a reputation for aggressive tactics, argued that the transferred funds were intended as private savings for our future together. The judge was unimpressed, particularly after reviewing the text messages discussing their plans to use my money to start a new life without me. Victoria also attempted to counter-claim infidelity on my part, suggesting I'd been involved with Melissa since before our separation. It was a desperate move, easily disproved by phone records showing we'd had no contact until after the divorce filings. Throughout the hearings, Victoria alternated between tearful remorse and cold defiance. She'd lost her job at Carson and Whitley, though whether she'd been fired or had resigned remained unclear. Jacob was facing his own professional consequences, placed on indefinite leave pending an ethics review by the State Bar Association. Melissa and I attended each other's key hearings, a visual reminder to the court and our soon-to-be exes that their actions had created an unexpected alliance. We didn't speak during these appearances, merely exchanged nods of solidarity. Outside the courtroom, however, we began to develop something like friendship. Weekly strategy coffee became dinner occasionally. Conversations about legal maneuvers expanded to include our careers, families, and eventually, our shattered dreams of what marriage was supposed to be. I wanted children, Melissa confided during one such dinner, 4 months into our respective divorce proceedings. Jacob kept delaying, saying we weren't financially ready yet. Now I realize he never intended to have a family with me. I shared how Victoria had done the same, always finding reasons to postpone starting a family. In retrospect, it was a blessing, I admitted. Imagine how much more complicated this would be with children involved. Silver linings in the mushroom cloud, she quipped, raising her wine glass in a sardonic toast. By the time my divorce was finalized 6 months after Discovery Day, Melissa's was concluding as well. The outcomes were as favorable as we could have hoped for. I retained my inheritance and the majority of our marital assets, with Victoria receiving only what she'd contributed directly. Melissa's settlement was similarly weighted in her favor, with Jacob facing additional financial penalties for misuse of firm resources. Neither Victoria nor Jacob emerged unscathed from the professional fallout either. Victoria had been blacklisted from major law firms in the city, her reputation tarnished by the scandal. Jacob's career survived barely, but his partnership was downgraded and his earnings potential severely impacted. I received one final text message from Victoria on the day our divorce became official. I hope you're satisfied with what you've done. You've destroyed 2 lives out of spite. I never thought you had it in you. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. That evening, Melissa called to share the news that her divorce was also final. "Free at last," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "Are you celebrating?" "Not exactly," I admitted, "more like contemplating next steps." "Which are?" "I'm considering relocating. Too many memories in this city." There was a pause before she asked, "Where would you go?" "I'm not sure yet, somewhere new, a fresh start." Another pause, longer this time. "Before you decide, would you be interested in a proper celebration tomorrow night, dinner at Marcello's? To mark the official end of our memberships in Copa." I found myself smiling at the reference to our imaginary support group. "That sounds like exactly what I need." "Good," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice too. "Because moving forward is the best revenge of all." As I hung up, I realized she was right. Victoria had taken much from me, trust and time that could never be recovered. But she hadn't taken my future. That remained mine to shape however I chose. And for the first time since discovering that text message 7 months earlier, I was genuinely curious about what that future might hold. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the Chicago skyline shimmer against the night sky. The move had been good for me, personally and professionally. New city, new position with a larger firm, new perspective. My phone buzzed with a text message from Melissa. "Flight landed. See you in about an hour." I smiled, typing back a quick reply before returning inside to check on dinner. We'd been dating for 6 months, taking things slowly, both still cautious after our respective marital disasters. But there was something solid between us, built on shared experience and genuine connection. We'd learned the hard way what betrayal looked like. Perhaps that's why we were both so committed to honesty now, sometimes painfully so. No secrets, no hidden agendas. Just two people choosing each day to trust again, knowing exactly what they risked. My doorbell rang precisely an hour later. Melissa stood there with her overnight bag and a bottle of champagne, amber eyes warm with anticipation. "Happy anniversary," she said, stepping into my embrace. "1 year since Freedom Day." I kissed her, taking the champagne. "Worth celebrating." Later, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights, glasses in hand, Melissa asked, "Do you ever regret how it all played out, the way you handled things with Victoria?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary, but no, I don't regret exposing the truth or protecting myself." She nodded, understanding perfectly as she always did. "Jacob texted me last week, asked if we could talk, said he's changed. This was news. What did you say?" "Nothing. I blocked the number." She took a sip of champagne, thoughtful. "Some bridges should stay burned." I reached for her hand, interlacing our fingers, to necessary endings. She squeezed my hand gently, and unexpected beginnings. We clinked glasses, the sound bright and clear in the night air. Below us, Chicago continued its rhythmic pulse of light and energy, indifferent to our small story of betrayal and recovery. Just one among countless human dramas playing out across the glittering grid of streets and buildings. Victoria had been right about one thing. I'd never thought I had it in me either, the capacity for such calculated justice. But she'd been wrong about why I'd done it. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Because sometimes the only way forward is to burn the past to the ground and walk away from the ashes, into whatever waits beyond the flames.